Starting out in the home studio journey can be very daunting. There's a lot to learn, there's a lot of gear to get. Where do I get started? And one of those aspects that can become very challenging is how do I get drums and percussion sounds in my recordings? So in today's video, I want to go over the 3 ways to get specifically drum sounds into your recordings and what your tools are, what your options are, and what can you use to help produce your songs and create a recording that you're proud of. Before we get started, you should download my home studio toolbox, which is a free guide, which includes a bunch of things for free that I'm going to mention in this video that you can get started using right now in your recordings. So go ahead and download that guide, and then we can start launching into the video. First and probably easiest way to get drums into your recordings is to use samples/loops. And what am I talking about here? Samples and loops are basically little audio files that people have already recorded and already created that can be used royalty-free by you to add drums and percussion into your recordings. Producers still today are using samples and loops to create amazing hits. So this is not an amateur way to do things. A bunch of people are still using samples. This started way back in the 80s and 70s where keyboards included different drum samples and sounds that people would simply hit, record onto the track, and then were used a ton all throughout those decades to create some of the biggest pop hits of the 20th and 21st century. Songs from albums such as Michael Jackson's Thrillers were just simply samples taken from Roland keyboards, and a lot of those kick and snare samples continue to be cloned and used today for pop hits that are being produced in our present year. So you can find different sample packs for free, and you can find many different websites such as Splice that offer samples and loops that you can use in your recordings. Now, a loop is generally an entire sort of drum playthrough or an entire clip of someone playing a drum part, and you can go ahead and drag those into your session to get started. You simply drag the audio file in there, adjust the tempo to whatever you're trying to use, and bam, you have, whether it's pop, rock, metal, doesn't matter, you now have a drum sound to be the backbeat of your song. What a lot of producers do, however, is they get individual samples. So it might be an individual kick drum hit, an individual snare drum, a hi-hat, and they'll combine these samples together to create their own drum beat. Because sometimes drum loops don't have the exact beat that we're looking for, and sometimes we're looking for a very specific kind of beat to fit our song, to fit our groove, to fit whatever our melody or guitar part is, and that's where samples can come in. However, producers will often combine loops and samples together to create a unique sound, something that's unique when you create your own kick and drums, snare groove to go with your track, and then add the loop in there to give it a consistent flow and feel. A lot of times producers will use things like shakers and tambourine samples because they've already been well recorded, and add those to their tracks to give it a final professional feel. One of the biggest advantages of using samples and loops is someone's already recorded them. You don't have to worry about recording them properly. It's already usually been done well if you find a well-produced sample pack, which is very, very easy to find nowadays. So you don't have to worry so much about the sonic composition of your drum sound. It's already done for you. You can drag and drop those in, and you have a pretty good place to get started for producing your tracks. Second way to add drums to your recordings is record them yourself. This is a massively daunting task. However, some people love the sound of organically recorded drums, and with a few mics and some techniques, you can get a half decent or pretty decent rock drum sound if you know what you're doing. However, this requires a ton of knowledge, typically a lot of experience producing, and having a good drummer, a space to do it, and the gear to do it, which is not very easily accessible. However, some of the best rock and metal records being produced today, they actually mic up real drums, and you get the nuances of a real drum performance in your song, which in my opinion really can't be matched. Over the proficiency of producing and mixing these tracks in the process, it's quite the enormous effort, and you probably need to be an experienced engineer to really get anywhere with recording and producing your own drum sounds. But like I said, really having that organic live feel of a drummer in the room playing, especially if they're a good drummer playing on a good song with a new fresh kit, mic'd up properly in a great sounding room. Think of the Led Zeppelin drum sound, right? This is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't really hear that being matched anywhere else. It just has a flavor and vibe that works for the music. Also, real drums were used a lot on like funk and soul and Motown records back in the 60s and 70s, and the groove on those records are incredible. It's phenomenal players playing phenomenal instruments on great songs, and it just has a soul and feel that samples or virtual instruments simply can't produce. So if you're up for the challenge, give it a shot recording your own drum kit. You might get good results, but it's very difficult. It takes a long time, to get good at this. And if you're just starting out in your home studio, I would suggest getting experience with samples and virtual instruments first before immediately jumping into miking and recording your own drum kit. But hey, the only way to learn is to try, and some people like to start there. So I encourage you to give it a shot, but there are other options than simply miking up your drum kit and trying to get sounds into your songs. And the third and last way to get drum sounds into your recordings is to use virtual instruments. What am I talking about with virtual instruments? Well, back when I started recording, most of the drum plugins that we were able to use, a plugin is just simply an insert in your DAW that allows you to now use an instrument inside of your recording software. Something like EZdrummer 3 is an example of a virtual instrument. It is a drummer at your disposal to add drum grooves with pre-recorded drum sounds, similar to samples. However, it's an entire drum kit that you're now able to utilize and take advantage of. A lot of times these drum sounds are triggered by MIDI grooves. This is a certain kind of file that tells the virtual instrument which parts to play in which time. This is how we're able to drag MIDI grooves into our DAW so we can start playing a drum groove in your song matched to the tempo of whatever the song is. So it's not morphing and changing the sample and stretching it to work in your song like a loop would that I mentioned in the first step. The virtual instrument actually triggers a sample in the correct time based on the MIDI groove in your DAW. This makes it very, very versatile to add drums to your tracks. You can import samples into these a lot of times, and you can begin adding grooves to your songs immediately with a unique drum sound and a unique MIDI drum performance that you're able to now move and change to match the dynamics of your song. Now, a lot of virtual instrument drum plugins such as Superior Drummer 3, EZdrummer 3, Get Good Drums, the list goes on and on. There's so many amazing ones on the market now, can be pretty expensive. That's why in a place like the Home Studio Toolbox, I outlined free virtual instrument drummers that you can download now to start getting experience with programming and using MIDI grooves in your songs. The sounds aren't really that bad. They're pretty good. A lot of people still use them on records today. I've done some videos on some free virtual drum plugins that you can get access to now. And with a little ingenuity and proper programming, you can really get a great drum sound on your songs for 100% free. I think it's pretty crazy what we have access to these days. Now, if you want to step up your game, I'm a big supporter of things like EZdrummer 3. It's only about $150. It comes with a ton of kits. It comes with a ton of MIDI grooves, and you're really going to have everything you need to get started for creating your own songs and creating your own drum parts in your tracks. So those are the 3 ways to add drums to your songs. You can take all 3, combine them together, pick your favorite. It doesn't matter. Whatever helps you start creating music is the one I'm in favor of. I've used all 3 of these methods for my tracks before. Each have different levels of difficulty, but each one of them have their own pros and cons and has their own way of expressing the music and the sound you're going for. If you have any questions, leave it in a comment down below. Go ahead and pick up that Home Studio Toolbox. And if you need help getting started or setting up your home studio, go ahead and contact me in the email down below. I'd love to help you out creating and producing your tracks in your home studio. This is Make the Music. I thank you guys so much for watching. And anyways, I will see you next time.